So, welcome everyone to the Way of Soul Remembering podcast, where we give people a space to authentically share about their spiritual journey and inspire with what they've learned. It's a great privilege, it feels special for me to have Daniel Kelley with us today, or this evening, or wherever it is when you're checking into this podcast. We've followed each other's work for quite a long time now, and he's read one of my books, I've read one of his books. We've had this kind of interchange going on, so it's really special just to have a little bit more space to get to know Daniel more. And it will be a kind of special time, I think. I would describe Daniel as a mystic, poet, and what he calls a veiler. So we'll go into that a little bit more. But please, Daniel, could you just introduce yourself a little bit and share about your work and anything in your practice that's currently alive for you?
Sure. So basically, the overarching structure of my work is how to remain conscious throughout the three broad states of waking, dreaming, and deep dreamless sleep. And that may seem like a tall order, and it is, but really, this is basically, I would say, the beginning of any true waking up process, not just my own, but across the board. We come at it from different angles. There are plethora of methodologies out there that appeal to us, and they appeal to us differently for reasons, which is something we can discuss if you'd like. But basically, that's the overarching thrust of my work. A lot of people, when they pick up my first book, they erroneously think that it's about lucid dreaming, which it's not. It's anything that comes under the banner of what I just referred to. Conscious sleep being the main thrust of the first and second books, because that's really what I call the first veil that we step behind between our wake-a-day world, in which we have our consensus reality, and of course, all of the assumptions and presuppositions surrounding that, and what's behind the surface of that. For myself, I started out at a very early age, not stepping behind that veil. I was unceremoniously thrown into it. So I've had to travel through madness to find me, which is a long story, but for the most part, I came into my own around about the year 2004 to 2006, where I really made a single-minded pursuit of integrating these two realms, and eventually succeeded. And of course, new petals unfold as I move forward, but I achieved being able to do that essentially. And it took me a while to articulate what was happening, that I was basically having a continuity of consciousness through these three broad states. And that's what we offer. Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you more about your journey
Sure.
into this world. You know, in life, we can develop all sorts of interests. And this is a kind of particular sort of, the way you talk about it, it's a very kind of kind of overarching kind of totality of being type thing. But it's also, it's a specific interest, something that's kind of drawn you to it. So I'd love to hear more about your journey from whatever age you want to begin into this a little bit. But I think also it's important because some of the people watching this podcast will not be familiar with some of the terms that we're using. So just so that people know what we're kind of referring to. Lucid dreaming is where you're conscious within the dream state. So there's an awareness of dream, there's an awareness, and when you become conscious in your dreams, incredible things can begin to open up. You have a kind of level of volition that you don't have in kind of ordinary non-lucid dreams. And if we're talking about out-of-body experiences, we're talking about consciousness. Kind of there's different ways of talking about it, but we're kind of talking about it basically as consciousness moving beyond the physical body into something other that we could call the realm of spirit, or the astral world, or the non-physical. So that's kind of maybe some of the areas we're going to be kind of touching upon. These things I know are deeply interesting and things that we practice ourselves, both Daniel and I, but I'd love to hear more about your journey. Yeah, so when did it begin? Were you naturally having these sort of experiences, or what was your way into it?
Well, basically, Tom, I was having these natural experiences from birth, arguably speaking, because I mean, as far back as the age of 5, my mother still has all the paperwork from the child psychologist's couches that I had to lay on and be questioned by. And it started about that age, as far back as I can personally remember, where I was basically living in the unconscious, and even aspects of what Jung would call the collective unconscious. To give you a quick story, and many of my friends and colleagues make jokes about this, by the way. It wasn't funny when it happened. When I was about 9 years of age, the night terrors I had and the spontaneous out-of-body experiences I had were so horrifying. I didn't really have lucid dreams until I was about, I'm going to say maybe like stably, till about the age of 16. But I can remember waking up. I don't know, maybe the crack of dawn, because the sun was just coming up when this experience ended, where I had a bunk bed. My brother was on the top, I was on the bottom, when I saw this creature running at me in a sort of dance that I would later recognize as a very common Hindu dance, and Shiva's often depicted doing it, was running at me with these staffs with flowers on them, and looked like he was trying to hit me with them. And so me, and I give my child self credit here, stood up and swung at it, and exploded in 1,000 colors. And I was, of course, shaking, and I was spasming from fear. But later on, a lot of my friends joked and said, because I had quite the winter arc, as the kids call it, for many, many years. And they said, it's because of that time you punched the god of luck in the face. And so I had experiences like that. We're talking constantly. While I was awake, while I was asleep, I couldn't function in school. They had me medicated by the time I was 13, 14 years old and hospitalized. They tested me for schizophrenia. They tested me for epilepsy. They eventually settled on the fact that I was horribly depressed, but of course I was. I was loaded up with all kinds of medications. And eventually I flushed all those down the toilet by the time I was 16. And the experiences continued anyway. Being on medications are awful. They were just as intense, just as terrifying, and sometimes very beautiful. But eventually, by the time I was about 16, I was in foster care at that. My family was extremely religious and did not know how to help me. Okay. So eventually I was just cut loose, and let's just leave it there. And I can remember there came a point where, to give an analogy, it was like being thrown in the ocean and without water wings and surrounded by sharks and these strange creatures, swim. And it seemed like that's what my nervous system was telling me and telling itself. So these experiences started to blend in with horrible sleepwalking episodes where I was choking. I was somehow always end up standing in front of a mirror in the bathroom, choking, never vomiting, but choking, couldn't breathe. All kinds of presences in the room. I sometimes would have premonitions and they would come true. There was one point during that period where there was a neighborhood kid. His name was Andy Flanagan. And I didn't know him well, but apparently I was screaming his name in this hypnopompic state. And come to find out, the next day he was taken away for brutally raping a 3-year-old girl. And I was screaming his name, like, stop, stop, stop. Like, these things would happen to me constantly. And I just sort of took them in stride, but the adults around me were terrified of it, and they didn't know what to do or how to help me. It took me many years, Tom, for me to realize that what was happening there was my nervous system was trying to wake up in this threshold state between conscious and unconscious, to put it very simply. I think it's more helpful to keep these things simple when explaining them. And eventually I did. Coming like 2004 to 2006, I had really made a concerted effort to join in on this process and sort of wire these things together. And when it finally happened, it happened suddenly. It wasn't something that was gradual. It was about like 2006 when I just realized I had gone 2 weeks, around 2 weeks, where I didn't go unconscious. I was awake, and then I'd go to sleep and I'm awake inside my sleep cycle. The hardest part for me was like the NREM state, where you're just deep dreamless sleep. But I realized that these hypnopompic states were happening in that state. They weren't happening in the dream state. They were happening in that NREM state, which is really close to, what the Vedantics call the causal self. It's the root of your ego. It's really, I discovered, is where your unconscious meets the collective unconscious. And you put a child in that situation and you put him there constantly, that's very traumatizing. It was, and it's still something that I see the scars of. Only I've learned to use them in a creative way. So that's really that's my journey in a nutshell. Come the age of about 24, 25, I really started diving into the world's wisdom traditions, broke away thoroughly from my family's Christianity. My father was a pastor, so their only interpretive framework was the Bible. So I was told things like, demons are trying to get you. There's a tug of war between God and the devil with your soul, like things you just don't tell a 5-year-old.
Wow.
They were well-meaning. My family was well-meaning. They were trying to give me a framework. It took me many years to realize that. They were trying to give me at least something to interpret this, and in themselves as well. They were trying to use what they knew to interpret something they didn't understand. So I was taken to path.
So Daniel, sometimes sometimes this is quite an initiation that you've had.
Yeah.
These things are mysterious, but this kind of full-on initiation that you had into these kind of experiences that other people will just be not knowing how to connect to. I feel for you, because that must have been very intense and a lot for a young person to
it was isolating.
And isolating as well. And kind of where I'm thinking of, because when was the first time that you met someone in your life that could meet you in what you were experiencing in a little bit more of a healthy way, and could kind of meet you with what you're experiencing, or was it really the volition to learn more about what was happening? Did it really just kind of come from you, or the yearning to know what was going on within you, or did you meet someone at some point in life that could really, kind of hold a space for what you're experiencing?
No, unfortunately, I didn't really have anybody in my life who created that space for me until actually really within the past 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm 45 now. So it was, and there was a time period where I was very resentful towards that, but I can understand. It took many, many years for me I get it. I had to create that space for myself. And oftentimes that meant living just above subsistence level poverty, and really just trying everything in my power to do a Spitfire approach to find that X factor. And there wasn't one. I tried all these things, Tom, and all these different practices and all these different paths, and they taught me a lot. But you want to know what I learned in the end? It had its own time. It had its own season, where it just sort of, all I was doing was creating that space by doing these practices. I wasn't making anything happen. That was already occurring. And there are people like that, okay? And not everybody is. Those are the people I call veilers, for lack of a better term. I couldn't think of anything else. I didn't want to come up with a name that was stigmatizing or cliche or something so woo-woo that it doesn't get any attention from even the people going through it. And those are the people that I personally am trying to target. So I've been called many things. I've been called elitist for it. I've been told, no, everybody has access to these things. It's like, yeah, but not everybody has the natural proclivity where it's already happening, whether they like it or not.
So and just to make sure that I have a sort of sense that what you meant by what you were saying just then, and just so that we can make sure viewers understand what you were saying, because it was almost like what you were saying was that you felt in a way, and this is my words, not necessarily the way you would describe it, but I'm curious if this will resonate, that you felt that your being was kind of being organically activated in a particular way that was quite unique to yourself, and there was no mapping of this that that mirrored your unique experience from the different traditions that you were following, and you felt in a sense that your nervous system was awakening or balancing in a way, but also maybe we could say that you were finding your own way to fully incarnate. Would that be a way to talk about it?
Very well said.
That your spirit was finding its way to incarnate on this earth. And I remember not to be too grandiose about it, but hey, why not a little bit? There's sometimes when you have, say, in the Tibetan tradition, quite a realized being, and they know that they have a sense this is an incarnation of a realized being, they don't really force too much teachings upon them. They don't really force too much teachings upon them necessarily, because they feel that what will come through the person, that's the special thing. That
right.
you don't want to fill the person's mind with too much conceptual stuff that will just be like information, which might in a way sometimes get in the way of that
Yes.
beautiful incarnation of this spirit. Because I don't know how you feel about it, but I always feel, and this was partly why I called my website soulremembering.com, that I feel that it is often a sense of remembering more than gathering new kind of new information. And when I kind of when I started to access more outer body experiences, I really felt that a kind of past life identity was helping me, that almost I was remembering how I used to do it at some time hundreds of years ago. So I kind of was gathering that. And it's not something I was reading in a book. It was kind of, the knowledge was coming organically in some way into through my being. Does that kind of, does some of that resonate with you?
Yes, and it was. And that's why I think one of the best things we can do if we find ourselves being called on this path is go ahead and don't limit yourself. I don't know if it's complicated, that what you're experiencing and reading, or what somebody's trying to tell you. Take everything with a grain of salt, but if something speaks to you, listen to that. No matter if it's a system that's extremely complicated or if it's something that's extremely simple. You're going to find, if you actually compare all the things that are calling to you, there's a common thread there. There's something behind who you think you are that's guiding you. It sounds so cliche, and it happens to also be true. And you're going to find out what that is by finding out what those commonalities are in the things that are calling to you. Sometimes it's a teacher or a series of teachers. Sometimes teaching or a series of teachings through books, through podcasts, through YouTube channels, just through people you meet randomly on the street. But you're going to notice that these things are saying very similar things to you, and not in an echo chamber, confirmation bias kind of way. It's more like deja vu. And if you're encouraged to follow those things, you're going to start to feel almost like, to give a good analogy, if like your shoulder was out of joint, it clicks into place suddenly.
Yeah.
And when that shift happens, there's no explaining to people what that is without hating the hell out of it. But, so things can go really far adrift into theory, but when it comes to explaining it, it's very good to keep it as simple as possible if you can, when you're trying to turn it into something practical to use.
Yeah. And so at what point did you feel that you could be it sounds a bit how to put this. At what point did you feel that you could talk about your experiences without the fear that people would pathologize you? Or are you not scared about that? You had it so much when you were younger that you just feel this is a part of how people will experience what's happening within you? How do you kind of relate to that?
Yeah, I was never afraid to do that, which was what caused me so much trouble with my family, my teachers, other kids growing up. It's one of the reasons why I was in foster homes for most of my adolescent life. I was not afraid to speak openly about these things, which to me, if I tried to keep those things inside, there were such powerful experiences happening to me. I would feel sick.
Really?
Sick. Yeah, I would feel like if I don't just let these things breathe. I think, honestly, Tom, that was a large reason why they took on such a nightmarish quality, because I was being told, shh, shh.
Do you how to put my mouth here and shit. But do you still relate to your experiences like that? Do you feel this kind of urge to share them in that kind of way? Or because it's this kind of like running thing in my mind at the moment, that do I overly share my experiences on blogs and social media, or am I kind of, there's that thing, there's this kind of there was a Tibetan Lama in the 20th century who said to one of his teachers, who's a well-known lucid dreamer teacher now, that his analogy was that spiritual experiences are like a candle that you're holding in a dark cave. And if you're constantly sharing your experiences externally, it's like giving that candle away and you're a bit left in the dark. But then other people seem to feel that no, the more and more we share, the more beautiful things we create, and the more we inspire others, and that we don't need to keep these things, you know, within our own sort of garden of our being in some way. How do you kind of relate to that?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think that there is a certain phase or phases, there are certain thresholds in our journey where it's very important to safeguard those things. If you don't, what's going to happen is A, you're going to become confused. B, you're going to confuse other people because you haven't found a way to fully articulate this new level, for lack of a better word, this new phase. So what's going to happen is you're going to get confused. You're going to start having other people distance themselves from you because they're not going to know where you're coming from, or they're going to start to mingle their journey with yours and completely obfuscate it. That dual sort of training, that dual evolution between two or more people is extremely rare. Most of the time when somebody's on a path of waking up, if they're in a crowd full of like 4 or 5 people, or even a crowd as small as 2, it's usually detrimental to their growth at those stages because you're not stable. You're not stable yet. And then it's really important for you to, play Harpocrates and be a little bit quiet about it, sure. But other than that,
fantastic.
A flower doesn't hold its perfume back once it blossoms. It just
beautiful analogy. That's a wonderful way of navigating that. I really resonate with that. One of the things that Daniel and I felt inspired to do is that we just wanted to share some of our poetry, and we'll just share it and see what kind of emerges through our sharing. And I feel, what do I feel? I feel like, which one should I do? I feel actually turning just to a really sort of simple one. It's not simple, but it's kind of, let's just see where it goes to.
So, sure. I'm excited to hear it.
A little poem about grief. In his hand, he held a stone, and he hid it in his heart. Then he felt wax, and he pushed it into his ears. In his clutches, he held a veil, and with it, he covered his eyes. In his heart, he felt a stone, and he removed it from his heart. In his ears, he felt an abundance of wax, and he scooped it from his ears. And with his fingers, he touched the veil and let it fall from off his eyes.
Wow. That's gorgeous, Tom.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. I can relate to that very much so.
It's that process of kind of, where we almost shut ourselves down, but then at some point feel ready to, open up again.
Yeah, and it's like, it goes back to what we were saying before, that has its own organic season.
Mm-hmm.
You can't force these things because your effort will help a little, but hinder a lot. And it's hard
I used to really struggle with that. Sometimes I'd be sitting on an airplane and someone would sit next to me and they'd be like, okay, we're here for 3 hours. Tell me your life story. Or I'd be on a retreat and there was just such a sense of the brothers, just they wanted you just to open up and tell your life story. And I was like, well, what level do you want me to share on? Because like, if I told you all of the things that were really, my most profound things were touching for me, I have a story, you're going to think I'm crazy, or you think I'm nuts, or you're like, what level do you want me to share? And also, I've just met you guys.
It's a future, right?
So I love that kind of, it's that thing of not, I think it's something that Robert Moss talks about, one of the kind of teachers that we both follow. You don't prise open the chrysalis before the butterfly is ready.
Yeah, it needs that struggle to strengthen its wings. Yeah, yeah. And that goes back to your point about how some people have a real issue with out of body experiences. It's like Ram Dass used to have an issue with that. He used to say everybody, in the 60s was trying to have an out of body experience when what they really needed was a fully in the body experience.
Yeah,
It's both. What's wrong with both?
exactly.
Yeah. I think
I
that
have not found like, I don't know, like it's obviously it's a complex area, but the
yeah,
majority, not to be too hard on people, but I'll be a bit hard. The majority of people who say these things haven't really got that much experience of them. The majority of people that think that lucid dreaming is some kind of like fluffy escapism, or if you're having out of body experiences, you must be like super, super ungrounded person. They haven't had the experiences of these things, you know. So it's like, and I don't see a contradiction. Although one of my kind of students, I was running a lucid dreaming event, and he was like, "Yeah, but Eckhart Tolle said recently, you don't need to worry too much about lucid dreaming. Just focus on lucid living." But I very much resonate with what you're saying, that for me in my life, there hasn't been so much of a contradiction. There are times where I feel like, no, I really need just to be more immersed in the physical. I need to be immersed in the physical. I need to kind of engage vividly with life. But there's so much riches in these more subtle worlds,
Tom, for
so
a
much
minute,
so.
at every single time somebody falls in love with somebody, they say, you know, everybody who falls in love with somebody, like what they're really doing is they're running away from themselves. No matter what, if you see somebody who falls in love with somebody and they're having the time of their life with this person because escaping themselves, it's like what rubbish. They're
Exactly.
of course
Who need to say to others what or what not to fall in love with?
sure. It's like what's wrong with both? The pillars of the temple stand apart but uphold the holy of holies. There's no contradiction once you widen your lens enough to realize that not everybody who's trying to have an out of body experience is trying to escape or needs to go to the loony farm. It's just not the case. Now I will say, as a segue, I did go through quite the villain arc when I started mastering lucid dreaming to the degree I have now. I mean, it was a drug for me, and I had to sort of pull back a little bit. I'm going to say when I was about 16 to about 20, that's really all I did in my spare time was induce those experiences because you can do just about anything. I don't have to tell you. And it's like, why you put that into a depressed person's hands, for example, and they're just going to run with it. It's going to become we don't really talk about those things much because then it produces people like the gentleman you were referring to. Well, everybody who's trying to have those experiences is running away. No, it's a phase that many people go through, just like anything
You
else.
find with your students and things, and I've found
Sure.
my experience that what comes from the lucid dream will often try, if we are a bit doing it in an unbalanced way, we'll try and nudge us in a way that will help us in our life. But have you found that, or have you found that you
Yeah.
need to sometimes kind of bring people back?
Yes. No, that's actually very true. It's sort of in different traditions they call that different things. I think it was Socrates called it the Agoides. In the Hermetic tradition, they call it the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. Does that sucker come with batteries or what? But ultimately, if you know how to listen and if you know how to look, you're going to notice if you're going off balance that there is something there. It's something behind you, as it were, who
Mm.
you are as a persona that will nudge you like that shoulder joint out of place. And
Yeah.
if you learn how to really gauge that compass and that North Star, eventually that stabilizes and it's no longer a phase, it's a trait of your consciousness. You
And
know,
have you had that in a sense? In fact, maybe you mentioned it in your book.
yeah,
Sometimes people have a very familiar, for want of a better word, guide type spiritual friend with them for quite significant parts of their life. Have you had that in your life?
oh yeah. Uh, and there was a dark night of the soul period there where that went away.
Mm.
That was difficult. That was a difficult period for me. But again, that had its own season.
Mm.
And I knew enough at that point to guide myself back to
Yeah.
the center. Yeah, that wasn't easy, but knowing something simply as good and bad, it's so simple that we tend to just convolute it and make it something that it's not. Once you really realize where you're supposed to be, there comes a point where it becomes common sense. You're like, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Get back to where you're supposed to be. And of course I was always happier as a result of doing that. But it was a struggle. That's for sure. Yeah. But that guide is always
just to kind of make sure that people understand that there is a balancing, it can be a really balancing thing. I would like the story about Bob Monroe when he was having an out-of-body experience and he hadn't had one for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And into the state, and the beings that he kind of found there were so positive, and they were like, Mr. Monroe, you're doing so well. And he was like, well, what do you mean? I'm not able to, I haven't been here for ages, like I haven't been here in my out-of-body experience work. And they were like, yeah, we know that, but really significant changes are happening in your physical life, and we're just completely delighted for you. We're completely delighted for you. So rest assured, people that doubt these things, that the powers in that side, they want things to go well for us in our physical life. I don't think they're
right.
to like, was it a Carlos Castaneda thing? There was this kind of thing of like that he was that his teacher was kind of warning him that he was just going to get like sucked away into like this kind of other dimension where the beings would just lure him away for like for all eternity. I don't know about the virtual reality of that, but that's not really been my experience of these things.
So tell me, I would like to know, as far as when it comes to the guide aspect of things, you strike me as somebody who has had that experience many times before, because when you've had those experiences, you can recognize that in people. And I've always sensed that in you. Yeah. I think that was one of our.
So I don't mind talking about it. I had a being for a long time, and just sometimes they just feel the same in some way. They feel the same. They don't necessarily appear in exactly the same form.
Right.
They feel the same. There's something about them that feels, there's a continuity of it. And for me, it was a woman, and this is over a long period of time, maybe about, I don't know, like 15 years or something like that. And she would nudge me. Yeah, she would nudge me in ways that, looking back and at the time, were the things that were beneficial for me to hear, in my life. But there was like an emotional connection as well. I remember sometimes when it felt like our connection had been like affected in some way. I remember one experience where I was in this location, actually quite close to where I'm on. What's behind me here is Silbury Hill, and close to here is a long barrow. And I remember I had one lucid dream, and I went to the long barrow, and it was a stormy scene. And I was at the long barrow, and at some point to my left, there was a woman crying. There was a kind of a female force, like in distress in some way. And I remembered interpreting at the time, it was like that somehow she'd lost some of her connection to me and she was trying to get it back. And sometimes when I would experience her, like after a bit of a dark night of the soul, she'd say things to me like, this is the first time this whole year I've been able to get through to you. This is the first time you've actually been open enough for me to actually get through, as if as if I'd been too clouded in some way. But I kind of had experiences with her where she had a sense of humor, and I think I related to her maybe some stories in the initiation book that I wrote. There was one time I wanted to test her to see if she really knew about my life in an authentic way, that she was really keeping an eye on what I was doing. And she said, oh, that's, she seemed to be glad that I was testing her. And she was like, look, I'll show you. And it was a bit awkward for her because she always said to me she'd never been incarnated on this earth before, that she'd never had a sort of human form. But she started to like awkwardly do these salsa dancing steps. And then like at the time I was doing a lot of salsa dancing, and she was like, look, this is the thing that you like to do. And she was like doing these salsa steps. She was doing it, and I was like, this is good. I remember actually, interestingly enough, when I asked her what her name was once, and the name that she gave was like Dora, which is a female name, but I always thought that maybe it was like relating to the kind of, as if she was a doorway into something, as if she
Oh,
was kind of, as if she was a doorway into some level of being. And
yeah.
I mean, maybe she'll come back, but the last time that I saw her, there was this kind of really poignant exchange where she's kind of said to me, she kind of let me know that she was leaving now. And she said some beautiful things to me. She's kind of said, I just want to let you know, I'm kind of leaving. I'm kind of moving on from this thing. And she had like these badges on, as if it was like a kind of, yeah, recognizing her long-term seeking to support, seeking to support me in different ways
Yes.
in my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I felt her energy so much, like for many
Yeah.
years, for many
Yeah.
years. And sometimes when I was trying to do something that was maybe going against my better interests, I remember one night, and I was in this kind of subtle, this sort of state that you were kind of referring to between sleep and weak. And it was as if she was kind of tussling almost with this other kind of energy form
Yeah.
kind of coming into my experience. And
Yeah.
it was just because I'd intended it. She then went off because, and the other figure was there, but as if she was kind of unsure if what I was asking for was actually in my best interest. So I always felt a lot of love from her. And it's interesting. I don't really talk about her that much to many people, but it's
Yeah. I
interesting
know. I
how
know.
how when I talk about her, it's like I'm talking about someone I know quite well, you know.
Oh, sure. And the connection can be extremely intimate.
Mm.
And so intimate, and the experiences can be so profoundly subtle that trying to talk to other people about it, well, first of all, there's a layer of people are going to say you're crazy,
Oh
but
yeah,
beyond, even if you're in good company, the only way you can really talk about it is poetically.
yeah.
Mine was also a woman, and she gave me the name Ima, and as a matter of fact, I should have picked that poem. I'll send it to you later, where I talk about her. I talk about her in many poems, but typically. And yeah, it's very difficult for me to talk about that experience without getting choked up, because it came to me at a time where I had been standing on my square as authentically as I possibly can for decades.
Mm.
And it wore me down. And I was really at a point where I was just sort of on my knees, when that happened. And it's almost like those beings read your story and they can see a few chapters ahead.
Yeah.
That, yeah, and they're trying to bring those aspects of your future self into the moment, because I say future self, but it's really just a wider lens. You,
Mm.
yeah, and I think that they have a bird's eye view of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to call them archetypes, but because I don't like to reduce something as powerful as almost like being in love
Yeah.
to such a sterile, perfunctory term. But that,
Mm.
like Antero Ali, I'm not sure if you're aware of him. He's another author. He recently passed. A beautiful human being, extremely wise adept. He believed that those archetypes were what we're talking about. He said they're alive, they exist, and for people who have a narrative of struggle and of having to overcome a lot of weight,
Mm.
especially men, those those guides tend to be at the mid levels. They tend to be anima figures. They tend to be female, and sometimes those anima figures will even have certain masculine qualities. If you lack that in your life, uh, I find.
I mean, actually interesting, and
Yeah,
just a really quick story on that. That when I remember once when I was really struggling, and I had quite a lot of aggression in me, and I met
yeah,
her in one of these states, and she transformed into a grandfather figure, as if she
no,
was trying to give me what I was lacking in some kind of way. So yeah, yeah, wonderful what you're saying, and yeah.
yeah, it's something that you can definitely have a lot of nostalgia for if you've had it and then it's gone.
Mm.
But I think that you honor those guides by sort of growing into those versions of yourself that they were trying to reveal to you in the next chapters of your story. I think everything really is ultimately a story. And that subjective realm is always interacting with what we would call the objective realm. And even that sounds so pale and simplistic when I hear myself say it. but they really do touch at certain points of our lives, even if we're not going down paths like the ones that you and I share, just in general. And there are people who have no interest in these things and they happen to them, and it completely transforms a hard person into a softer one.
Yeah.
Not in a derogatory way, but it softens their sharpness, and could be of tougher fiber. It toughens them up. Something happens. It's almost like it's the muse, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's a muse that's almost like the mascot of either the next version of you in that chapter or the entire opus of your soul's journey. I think it's that. That's my personal theory of it, but I could be wrong.
No, that's a beautiful theory, and I'm completely open to feeling, talking about these things in like a myriad different way, I think. Yeah, these things are deeply interesting and curious, and I think some of the people listening or watching this will be curious if you're willing to share maybe like a recent journey or a sort of subtle experience that was meaningful for you, that's alive within you, that you'd like to share at this moment.
Sure. So I've been having a lot of very strange premonitions, extremely strange. And I'm going to say probably I've always had them, but there have been a noticeable increase of them over the course of the past 2 years. And I've noticed that this corresponded a lot to all of the changes happening on the planet right now, and have been really profound. And others have been just like, why? Like, for example, about a week ago, and I shared this with a friend of mine, Haley, the Lucid Mystic. Are you familiar with her channel?
No,
oh, yeah, you should definitely check her out. Great content. But the experience was strange. I was just waking up from a lucid dream. Do you remember those paintings where if you stare at them without blinking, it's just a bunch of mess, but if you stare at them without blinking, a scene appears behind them?
Magic eye things.
Yeah. Having a lucid dream, the tail end of one, before I woke up at around 4 a.m. And I was staring at one of those. And inside of this painting, there was a woman. It looked almost like Quentin Tarantino-ish. She had a cigarette and these heart-shaped glasses on her. I didn't think anything of it. I woke up, got ready, and went to work. And I stopped at a local gas station. And there was an Indian gentleman, and he was wearing a shirt that had these crazy patterns on it. You can see where this is going. And I said, man, your shirt's giving me a headache. It's too early for that. And he goes, stand back and look at it. I'm like, okay. I stand back and look at it. I said, I don't see anything. He goes, don't blink. What appeared in his shirt? A woman smoking a cigarette with heart-shaped glasses on. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, what's the point of that, right? Who knows? Maybe it was just a pointer to be more conscious of that behind the veil world throughout that day. Don't get swallowed up in all of the details of your life and pay attention.
There is a kind of a teaching there, but let's just leave it open to whatever the view is or we kind of feel about that. But that's a curious experience, and what I wanted to share, and I'd be curious if your experiences of these things. Often people assume that that the dream world can seem like a very visual thing, and
big mistake. Yeah, big mistake.
Fast and like, and and I know, but I think it's worth sharing a little bit that other senses can awaken in these states within lucid dreams. Your sense of touch, sense of smell. It's not just visual. The sense of hearing or premonitions. Other things begin to awaken up. But what I've always found, kind of energetically taking my breath away sometimes when I experience it, is sometimes I go to realms that are as physical as these realms, as physical as we are in now. And sometimes when I go in those experiences, I'm like, it's like fucking, I shouldn't swear at everyone. Like, it's like, wow, this is as physical as physical life is. I mean, if things can change in those experiences, things might begin to move, but that you go into these feeling states and it's like, this is completely solid. This is as physical life is. Do you sometimes have that experience?
Oh, I've been having that experience since I was at least 9. Yeah. Wow. And the thing is, and this is why in my own work, I talk about degrees of lucidity, and I separate that ultimately from out-of-body experience, because I do believe it's almost related to each other as swimming is to flying or jogging. But there's degrees of it, you know, like LD1, lucid dreaming, the first phase is more like hypnagogic imagery. It's something that doesn't really tend to have too many tactical things to it. There'll be some feelings where like maybe one part of your body will feel larger or smaller than the other, tactile things like that. But once you get to the deeper phases of lucidity, it's almost like not just a full-bodied, full sensory experience, but also a sixth one is really taking over oftentimes. You can, like, I've had lucid dreaming sex that's beyond anything I've had in the physical realm. And I've had beautiful experiences in the physical realm. And smells and tastes and all of that can be so tremendously amplified in those states. It's almost like your nervous system knows those sensations more than the part of your brain that is experiencing them in passing.
Yeah. So if people have, I really recommend the book, Behind the Veil: The Complete Guide to Conscious Sleep. I think you've also, have you written a second book as well? I think
oh, it's funny. You've got the self-published copy. That was taken up by Original Falcon Press in 2015, and you should see what we've done with those two books now. The second one that I wrote was actually, that was the most difficult, because when I started writing that, it was really in response mostly to the criticisms that I had of the first book. The first book got great reviews. I was happy to see that. And I had tons of emails come in from people who said that it's helped them tremendously on their own path. The second book was written to streamline a lot of the practices outlined in the first. Funny fact was, when I first started writing that first book, I had never read a single book on lucid dreaming.
Wow.
Not a single one. I had read books on astral projection back in the day, like the New Age interpretation of those, tons of philosophy books. But I've always had this terrible habit of, if I have access to something, I figured I've already got that, so I don't really think about it too much in terms of expanding my knowledge on it. So I really read books on it until I started writing my first book, so that I could find a way to use terminology familiar with that community. Part of the practices were things that you don't really find too much in that. There were things I kind of came up with spontaneously, and things that I did, of course, borrow from other traditions. So when I wrote that second book, I wanted to introduce new information, but I also wanted to streamline the things that maybe were over people's heads a bit, which was criticisms I had of the first book.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's the second book called?
It's called Beyond Lucid Dreaming: The Art of Conscious Sleep. And that's published by Original Falcon Press. And I believe that came out in 2020. Yeah.
I want to give some space for you to recite one of your poems.
Sure.
And then maybe what we could do is, just as a little bit of a kind of a breathing and a kind of spaciousness in this chat that we're having.
Sure.
In your first book, Behind the Veil, you give an instruction for embryonic breathing. I think kind of the Tao, sort of the kind of the Tai Chi tradition.
Sure.
I'd love if you're open to doing that, just to guide viewers through. Maybe read out one of your poems, and then do a little sort of 5-minute just guiding through something like that kind of breathing exercise that you have within your book, and that kind of like a little meditation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, I've got one here that I before we started this podcast. Let me see here. Okay. This is something called Resolve. And I think it's good that I picked this. Maybe something in me knew something I didn't before we started talking. I picked this because I really wanted to highlight the importance of, if you've come across some kind of a mountain in yourself, along whatever spiritual path that you're on, or just in life, I think it's important to really realize that there's something in you stronger than you know. There's something in you also that already knows the end to the chapter you're in. Okay, and if you're not gonna touch base with that part of yourself unless you really persevere through whatever challenge you're facing, whatever obstacle it is. So this is called Resolve. Long and marked by tears the trail, dark and far uphill the climb. Skyward stabs the crown you hail as ceaseless throbs the lofty chime. The beacon is by vapor swallowed, impish doubts like phantoms choke. That blazing light devoutly hallowed is lost in the rapacious smoke. Let faith be your tenacious guide. Let courage be your noble horse. So naught might handicap your stride, nor lure you from your chosen course. If only you would see this truth, and let your passion stand as proof. No more that steeple would you seek, for you have now become the peak. Winding round that regal road, paved with God's eternal fire, throngs of sprites recite the ode, and lift it to that fearsome spire. By clouds your weary feet are hooved, your winged eyes to heaven raised. That trophy by the stars is roofed, and by your eyes is duly praised. But your ardor has been ill appointed, unrequited is your love, but no lofty perch is so anointed that you could never rise above. If only you could see this truth, and let your passion stand as proof, no more that steeple would you seek, for you have now become the peak.
Thank you, Daniel, for sharing that beautiful poem. I'll ask Daniel about it. Well, I can ask him now, but maybe we can put the poems we're reciting in the description for the video, and so sit with him. Just as a little intro to this, I was talking to one of my coaching students a few days ago, and she does Qigong and Tai Chi, and she was saying, you know, she didn't really have a sitting practice to do. She was like, I want to do like a sitting meditation practice, and I was thinking, oh, I think Daniel would be a good person to talk to, or I was encouraging her to get one of your books to kind of to have a more, because she wanted to get into things like lucid dreaming, and I was thinking, oh, you know, I really had your kind of practices in mind that you've put within the book. So maybe just as a short practice, you could guide us all through something like the kind of the breathing practices that you encourage within.
Yeah. So first, a bit of an overview. Something to understand about embryonic breathing is that if you look at nature, when it gets dark outside, or when there's going to be a storm, when the rose closes its petals, when the leaves of a tree turn themselves backwards, and all of that, that is basically what the ancient Taoists were looking at when they tapped into what they saw as an embryonic state. When you reach deep dreamless sleep, you're reaching the embryonic state naturally, or what they call wuji. In Taoism, two concepts need to be understood, especially if you're going to practice embryonic breathing, and of course, its correlate in the small cyclic heaven, or what the yogis call microcosmic orbit. You have those two centers. If you picture your body as a yin-yang symbol, down here is the yang symbol, right below your navel, about 2 finger widths below, and about maybe half a finger width inward below your navel and behind it. And the center, this is the hard part, because this is where you have to start when you're going to practice wuji, or embryonic breathing. The yin center, what the Taoists call shen, it's right there in the space where you start to think, right where the thought arises. If you can follow that, not any specific thought process or any specific thought in and of itself, but the movement of the mind itself, if you can just watch that like you'd watch a bird in flight or a storm passing over, something happens where you start to fall into the center. The hard part here is not falling asleep unconsciously. Most of these forms of meditation are simply a form of conscious sleep, that when you tap into it, you're also utilizing that state to circulate energy, or to expand it, or to lead it to certain bodily organs. Grand circulation, of which embryonic breathing is the start, is something like our sleep, wake, deep dreamless sleep cycle. And tapping into that consciously changes those states fundamentally. It adds something to it, which is a very long story. But those small circulation and wuji state, those taiji and wuji dichotomies, find their correlate in, say, things like the respiratory cycle that we share with trees, right? That's a grand circulation. So you can't understand embryonic breathing in the practice I'm about to show you if you don't understand its purpose. So what you want to do first, you can practice this lying down, but you don't want to practice this on your side. You want to be able to think of yourself as a level. You ever see the level sticks with the green liquid in the middle? You want to be physically and mentally level. And you want to hold yourself there braced, not stiff. You don't want to hold yourself still, but you want to make sure that you can feel yourself completely braced so that not even your eyelids are fluttering when your eyes are closed. And just as also a codicil to that, you can practice this with your eyes open, but you don't want to stare at anything complex. You want to stare at a blank wall, or even the tip of your nose, or even your eyelashes, if that makes sense. That's what I used to do. I used to, in certain light, be able to see the tips of my eyelashes because they're long, and I would stare at them, and that would keep my eyes from fluttering. Because if your eyes are still, in this practice, you want your eyes to be still so that the energy that normally goes into them falls back into that yin center. So that's the first stage. You don't want to focus on your breathing so much in the first stage. You want to follow your thought movement until the point where you're occupying your awareness to such a degree that the moment a thought or an emotion rises, you're at the tail end of it. That's the yin center. Once that happens, and you'll start to fall into more of a theta, alpha, theta, and then a delta state. Once you're between the theta and the delta state, that's the state you want to be in for embryonic breathing. And you want to hold that. You don't want to fall asleep. You're going to notice that you kind of do things like this when you first practice it, and you're falling forward. And if you lay down, you'll just fall asleep. So it's going to take some practice for you to get that. So what we're going to do, you want to start off in whatever position you're in for this particular introduction to it. You don't have to sit in any particular posture, okay? And what you want to do is you either want to stare at a blank wall, or you want to close your eyes, and you just want to be in the moment. Give yourself 2 minutes to just be in the moment. And you're going to look behind your eyes at any colors, shifting patterns, or white spots, or anything that you see. And just watch those. And just pay attention to whatever movement of thought is there. And just listen to the sound of my voice. Whatever comes into your awareness, like a basic mindfulness practice, you simply don't want to judge it. Just allow it to be there. Let it arise, self-liberate. Now, you want to take the tip of your tongue, and right behind your teeth, you want to touch the tip of your tongue to the upper palate. And you want to do this in a relaxed way. You don't want to push the tongue up into the upper palate, into the soft palate. You just want to touch it there. This connects the governing and conception vessels on the back and the front of the body, respectively. And simply breathe naturally for now. And try to remain completely still. Then I want you to become aware of your natural breath cycle. Don't do anything with the breathing right now. Eventually, what you're going to do is you're going to do something called diaphragmic breathing, which the chest remains completely still, and you're breathing in and out through your nose in such a way where you don't even feel the air going in and out, because the breathing has become so diaphragmic that you don't really feel the air at all. You want it to be thin, as the documents say, from the Tower of Fragrance. Thin, slender, and quiet is what the breathing should be. And bring your attention to where you feel warmth. This is the best way I find to teach people how to find the lower dantian, which is the yang center. When you become completely still, you'll start to notice, if you bring your awareness down to your gut, that there's a warmth there. There's a spot that's warmer and even tingling more than the other parts of your abdomen. You want to rest your mind there. It's usually right about maybe an inch away from the spine towards the navel and 2 inches down from the navel. And you want to rest your mind there at the same time as you're maintaining awareness of your Shen, of your thoughts, your emotions, your physical sensations. And you want to just simply hold all of these things in your awareness at the same time. This is the beginning phase. It's called access concentration, or Sahaj Samadhi in the yogic traditions. After about 15 to 20 minutes, which is a good first session, you're going to notice very, very interesting sensations. Usually those sensations are because you're falling into a light sleep, or even something similar to a hypnotic trance. Now, what you're going to do is, unlike a lot of yogic pranayamas, you don't want to be in any way tense when you perform embryonic breathing. You want to be very, very relaxed, because if you're tense in any way, you block chi, you block the prana, you block the energy. But you don't want to be so relaxed that you're no longer behind the steering wheel. You want your what they call yi to govern the shen and to govern the chi. So you want to be alert, but not so tense that you're in a beta wave state. You want to maintain that theta, delta threshold awareness. And on your next exhale, when you breathe out, keeping the tongue to the upper palate, you're going to bring all of your awareness to the lower dantian, to the area that you feel tingling or warmth in. And you're still just going to breathe naturally in, and you're going to focus more on the inhale than the exhale. And you're going to do normal abdominal breathing. There's reverse abdominal breathing, but that's a little further down the road. Just breathing normally, you're going to bring more of your attention to the inhale. And then when you breathe out, you simply relax your vigilance. So when you breathe in, you bring all of your awareness to your lower abdomen, your lower dantian, and then you're going to breathe out without a pause. There's no kumbhaka or breath holds here. You're going to breathe out, just let it fall out of your lungs. You don't have to breathe slowly at this point. Just in and let it fall out while feeling your energy sink down, giving into gravity. The inhalation is yin. It's when you're storing chi and you're bringing it inward to replenish your hormones and your adrenal system. When you breathe out and you focus more on that, that's more of a yang breath. That's to push chi outward into your organs and beyond the skin boundary into the environment. So oftentimes people will practice embryonic breathing when the seasons change. They'll go to where the trees are, the oceans, or the mountains. They all have different chis for different purposes, and they'll embryonic breathe those in and store them in the lower dantian. That's its purpose. So I'm going to stop talking for the next 3 or 4 minutes. And I want you to just go ahead and focus on your lower abdomen, on the feeling of warmth, breathing naturally, and just focus on the inhalation. Tip of the tongue to the upper palate. And you want to sit straight and as still as possible. The only movement should be your stomach moving in and out. Now, once you feel yourself a bit relaxed and stabilized and your thoughts have slowed down, you're going to add one more thing on the exhale. The perineum between the genitals and the anus, you're going to, on the exhalation, lightly pull up. You don't want to tense too much. This is called the Huiyin cavity, and this controls the in and outflow along the conception and governing vessels of qi. So when you exhale, you hold it lightly up like a Kegel, like a light Kegel exercise. And then when you breathe out, or when you breathe in, you're going to push it out. So when you breathe in, gently push down on the perineum. And when you breathe out, you hold it up. After a while, after you practice this a bit, you're going to notice that you start to feel like the entire environment is breathing. It's no longer confined to just the sensations of your stomach moving up and down or of your perineum moving up and down. You're going to start to feel like the entire room is breathing. When this happens, you've achieved embryonic breathing. For me, it took about, I'm going to say roughly 7 or 8 years before I could do this stably, before it became something that I can access, even sometimes in a lucid dream state. But it's been a beautiful tool to have in my arsenal, because in times of stress, especially, or times when I feel like I'm getting sick, I can practice this, and it boosts the immune system, it stores energy. And if you've ever looked into the 100 days of building the foundation, the Taoist practice, when I did that, and I completed that last year, that was challenging. You start to get into how to preserve your hormones, how to boost them naturally, and you're keeping all of your neurotransmitters and your dopamine centered around these practices. And then you really start to see these things, momentum takes over, and you start seeing a lot of results. The difficulty a lot of students come across when they're practicing these things is it takes a while to see the results that the classics tell you about. Mm-hmm. But once you get them, it's like any other skill. It's there. You've got it. It's something that you just have in your arsenal. You know?
No, I feel like I could talk to Daniel for like about 3,500 hours or something, but I'm aware we've gone quite deep already this evening.
Yeah,
we've had, and the practice at the end, and I'd love to chat more with Daniel on something like this podcast. There's just so much that we could kind of go into together.
Oh, sure, we could talk for days. I'm sure of it. Yeah.
Days. Daniel, how do people get in contact with you? What's your website? How would you like people to reach out to you?
I currently don't have a website for this. I've been so immersed in, as you know, I'm a professional magician, and I've been really immersed in that and using that as a side pivot, and also getting lots of other professional credentials basically down into my pocket. Best way to contact me is through my email, or even through my phone, through text, or through Messenger, or any social media outlet. That's the only thing I use social media for, really, is to connect with people like you. And yeah, so I can put my email, of course, in the
Daniel's. We'll put links for Daniel's.
Yeah.
This video, and also maybe his Facebook profile, or just ways to reach out to him. But I'd love
forward to hearing from you. Definitely.
Yeah, I'd love to chat more to Daniel on platforms like this, and it's been a real honor for someone to give so much of themselves and to share about things that are really quite, these are intimate things that we're sharing, but
very.
So thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you to everybody at home for tuning in. Bless you.